All right. Hey everyone, it's Adriele. Welcome back to another episode of DEI in 5. Today we are live and I am joined today by Carmela Montenegro. Today we are going to be doing sort of a live audit of products, websites, job postings. We're kind of winging it here. So definitely inviting you all to share any sorts of websites or content that you'd like us to take a look at and review. Before we get into that, I am going to do a little bit of kind of like a mini workshop almost on inclusive language and inclusive images because I think it's important to make sure that we are aligned, as always, about what we're talking about, to share some of the things that we'll be looking out for as we go through and do this sort of live review or live audit. And then also it'll be helpful for anyone that's tuned in to just get a sense of what you should be looking out for outside of just our sort of live audit. So we'll do some quick intros and then we'll get started. Again, my name is Adriele. If you're here for the first time, welcome. I am a DEI thought partner, consultant, strategist, entrepreneur. I dabble in all sorts of things. For those of you who may not be able to see me, I am a Black woman. Today I'm wearing glasses. I have a tan shirt on and I have mini twists that are up in a wild bun that I could have tended to a little bit more today, but here we are. And Carmela, would you like to give us a quick intro of who you are and what it is that you do? We always mute ourselves. It's
Yep.
impossible. There we go.
Here we go. Okay. It froze for a second there. Hi, my name is Carmela Montenegro. I do diversity, equity, inclusion for the outdoor industry. Most of my work is focused on team trainings, culture audits, and assessments. So I like understanding what's going on in an organization, figure out our layers of oppression, how we can empower people at all levels. And that's how I usually work. I'm also an entrepreneur doing more of the content creator side. And a little description of me, little Filipina lady, shaved head, yellow cap on, and a very nice textured black corduroy shirt.
Awesome. 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 Happy to have you here. Carmela and I have been we've been in touch on LinkedIn for some time now, connected there, but we finally had a chance to like actually sit down and chat, which was awesome. And we were like,
Yeah,
we need to do some collabs. So I'm excited to
yeah.
chat with you and also leverage your expertise as far as marketing goes, especially because I know you have a lot of experience there. So without further ado, let's just get into it. I'm going to share my screen. I feel like I'm on a Zoom call right now. Bear with me, folks. Can you see my screen? Can you see it? All right. Just kidding.
You're on mute.
So, like I said, we're going to do a little bit of a mini workshop. Inclusive language and inclusive images are something that I've really looked at for quite some time now, and I think it's really important to pay attention to. I think often in the DEI space, when we talk about inclusive language, we're often thinking about job postings. And so today I want to go a little bit beyond that. I will be touching on job postings, but I want to explore a few other things. I'm going to pause here for just a second. Sorry about that. All right. So, inclusive language, why should we care, right? So, when we're talking about inclusion, let me take a step back. When we're talking about inclusion in itself, we're often talking about both an intentional action, but also an outcome that we're looking for, right? And so, when we're talking about the act of including people, it's actively and being mindful and intentionally inviting people into something, whether that's a space, a conversation, decisions, etc. And then when we're talking about the outcome, it is the feeling that we want people to feel included, right? And so when we're talking about inclusive language, we're talking about language that is, embracing and respecting our differences as people. So that taps into diversity. We are looking to use neutral language. So instead of things like, hey, you guys, right, we might say, hey, y'all, or hey, folks. And we're looking to use respectful terms and avoid any sort of assumptions about people. Um, it can reflect our, individual preferences and experiences when it comes to communication, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. And just quickly why we should care, right? We should care because it does actually combat against exclusion, right? When we are including people and using inclusive language, we are reducing the risk of making people feel or just simply be marginalized. We are reducing the chances that they'll feel excluded. We are reducing potential harmful stereotypes or biases as well. And we are actively making an attempt to create a safe and welcoming environment where people feel like they can be who they want to be in that space, that they can do their best work, especially if we're talking about the context of a workplace. And lastly, when we are leveraging inclusive language, it is pretty much just directly giving us an end to promote equity, to promote social justice, and to build positive relationships with folks. Carmela, anything to add on to why we should care?
Oh, why should we care? Particularly in the outdoor industry, just gonna lean into my experiences here. The outdoor industry is becoming increasingly diverse. A lot of research published by the Outdoor Industry Association in 2017 to 2022 has released that white demographics, predominantly male, aligning demographics, have been stabilized, and there's a lot of interest from Asian Americans, Hispanic, Latina communities, and Black communities, Indigenous communities. Pretty much anybody in the BIPOC side is seeing increasing interest in the outdoor industry. And without that without that inclusion, we're expecting to see the outdoor industry and conservation, environmentalism, and advocacy for against oil companies to decrease in the next, what did they say, 20, 30 years. So it's really important when we're talking about rallying certain communities, looking for the greater good, to be inclusive of all types of communities that we're talking about. Because if we have the ultimate goal of talking about, let's say, conservation and climate change, if we're ignoring certain communities, there's a whole set of demographics that want to be part of the conversation, but again, are just feeling left out.
Makes sense. Yeah. Oof, that's helpful, and also something new for me as well. So appreciate you sharing that. And I think one thing, and this is kind of a perfect segue to the next thing I wanted to touch on, is just as we're talking about, inclusive language, looking at inclusive images, that sort of thing, the goal here is not for you to become an expert on every single identity and demographic and intersectionality, right? That's not what we're aiming for here. It's just simply to be mindful of the language that you're using and to, whenever possible, use the most respectful language that you can. So, with that, when we are often working in the DEI space, diversity, equity, and inclusion space, we talk a lot about identity first language versus person first language. And typically, best practice, I'm saying typically, heavy emphasis on typically best practice, is to use person first language, right? And so, when we say identity first language, it's putting the person's identity first, right? Black woman, right? Versus, me, Adriele, a woman who is Black. That is then putting the person first. And so just being mindful that, again, that is often best practice, but it doesn't mean that it's always the best choice or option. True best practice is to listen and to mirror how other people are referring to their own identities and introducing themselves. But if you don't know, typically defaulting to person first language is best practice. A few tips, of course, listen actively. Whenever you are unsure, for example, about someone's identity or pronouns, if it is relevant, you can ask. People prefer you to just ask versus just make assumptions, right? There's also the option to just refer to people by name as well. Not very difficult. Be open-minded, be flexible. If you make a mistake, if you misgender someone, for example, it's Pride Month, so I'm putting a little emphasis on this in particular. But if you misgender someone, whether accidentally or not, correct yourself. Don't wait for someone else to correct you. Model inclusive language, and again, as part of that, being open-minded is to just continue learning, seek new perspectives, And you don't have to go out of your way to do that, right? If you're not someone who typically listens to podcasts, don't start today listening to podcasts. But if you are, someone that's really big into movies, start watching more movies with people that you don't typically watch movies from, or that have different actors, or that are written by different folks, right? There are very easy ways to start to expand who you're interacting with and who you're learning from and who you're kind of leaning into to be more inclusive. Just a few examples here, again, in terms of how someone refers to themselves, a disabled person versus a person with a disability, or perhaps they're even more specific about what that disability is. I will say that there is, in terms of the disabled community, physically disabled community, often they prefer identity first language. That is something that is often inherently valuable or valued to them. And so they don't want to feel like, oh, I have to be shamed and use person first, because that's just who I am. And so there's been a lot of research around the disabled community and how and why, person first language isn't always best practice for them. In contrast to being inclusive, try to be on the lookout for non-inclusive language. So recognize that there is language that can reinforce stereotypes and biases. So we want to be mindful of that. Again, the goal is not for you to become an expert on every single identity, but to just be mindful, open-minded if someone corrects you, if someone introduces something new to you, that you're not like, I don't care about that. Instead, be open, ask questions if necessary, as long as it, of course, does not add additional pressure to said individual that you're asking those questions of. Any other thoughts, Carmela? I'm going to shift to the images in just a moment.
Yeah, something that I recommend my clientele, or when I'm onboarding new teams or doing my first training with new hires, earlier talking about exposing yourself to different identities when you're looking at movies, reading books. One thing that I challenge my team, and we usually set aside like 5 minutes, I ask somebody to volunteer, okay, go on your Instagram or go on your LinkedIn. I usually recommend doing something where it doesn't have to be a mutual followership, like on Facebook. So what I say, okay, tell me who's on your feed for 1 minute. Can you tell me the general identities of the people you are following? And that, I personally like that a little bit more than talking about movies, primarily because you're going through it so quick and you're looking more for that uh, unconscious bias compared to watching movies. So it's a great way to figure out who you're comfortable consuming content from, who you like learning from. And I challenge them here, follow 2 or 3 other people, ask anybody else in the group to follow X, Y, and Z. So that's an activity that I really love doing with new hires. And yeah, and I really love how you touched on the language. Some people prefer um, identity first or people first. Generally, I am identity first. Filipina lady, that's how I identify myself. Queer woman, like that's how I identify myself. So like, again, I love how you touched on that, whereas a lot of people brush over that a lot.
Yeah, and it's really an exercise in active listening at the end of the day, right? I think people often feel like DEI is this foreign thing of, oh gosh, I have to do all this stuff to be inclusive. No, you're just actively listening. I'm listening to what you said and how you identified yourself. And so if I need to go introduce you to someone else, I can say exactly what you said and how you introduce yourself, right? And it takes the guesswork out of it, which I think is useful. On the screen, there are a few examples of common sayings that are perhaps exclusionary. For example, you guys, I touched on that one. And so some alternatives: everyone, you all, y'all, depending on where you're from, folks. Another one that gets overlooked is the use of the word master or owner. I know sometimes people will create files, especially in like project management. And again, these examples aren't meant to like get you to get folks to change how they're speaking overnight, or to say, oh, you can't use this language. It's just calling attention to some common terminology that historically we've probably used and not even thought about, but may be potentially offensive to some folks, right? So again, master owner as an example, some people might instead label their files as primary project management tool or main roadmap or whatever it may be. A couple more crazy, I think that's one I'm guilty of where I'll be like, oh, this is crazy, right? And some people, if they are dealing with mental health issues, may see that as offensive, right? So instead, being more specific about naming what it is. This was unexpected. This was unusual. This was surprising. Others turn a blind eye as a common phrase or statement, and I recognize. I just want to say that a lot of these are from Western culture, but this list continues to grow as language continues to evolve. Language is always evolving, as is everything else. And so phrases like turn a blind eye, instead of saying that, we could say overlook, ignore, disregard. One that's been really common that I've had conversations with a lot of folks lately about is the use of girl or girls to refer to women in workplaces. But we never do that when we're talking about men. And so I recognize this is a very binary example, but just being mindful that there is a discrepancy there, right? There is a bit of an imbalance when we're referring to women as girls instead of women or individuals. The last two here, one is diverse, so referring to an individual as diverse. I say this time and time again, a person cannot be diverse. By definition, you can go Google, you can look at Merriam-Webster. Diverse and diversity is referring to our collective mix, a group's collective mix. I have a handful of candies. It's a diverse mix of candies because there are different types in there. This one individual Kit Kat cannot be diverse, right? I know that's a ridiculous example, but very practical. And then the last one, fire off a response, quote unquote, or shoot you a note. Those, again, can be touchy statements, unfortunately, but instead, again, we're looking to say specifically what it is. Send, provide, drop a response, drop a note, send me a DM, that kind of thing. So, again, some folks may look at these and be like, oh, this is ridiculous. But I'm just, again, calling attention to some research that's been done and some statements that have been highlighted as perhaps being exclusionary. Carmela, any others that come to mind for you or things you want to add on to this?
Yeah, as you were talking about some of the Western responses, like turn a blind eye was the one that really triggered this moment for me. There was a teammate, we were talking about the quote, holding down the fort, and how that was, I can't give you history behind it, but apparently it's toward like indigenous people and defending their forts and their tribes, something like that. But I recall having an employee saying, that's a little too far, I'm not doing that. And I was like, all right, think about your privilege and ask me that again.
Sure.
So where I was going with that, like, whenever you see things like this and you think it's a little bit of a stretch to change how your neurons are firing just for the sake of it, think about the higher good is the best way I can put about it. Just because it doesn't mean anything to you doesn't mean it doesn't impact everybody else. So little tip on my end and how I combat that when I encounter that in the workplace.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, we're not here to get people to change or to, overhaul who they are or how they've historically talked, but it's just, again, an exercise in mindfulness at the end of the day. I think, another one that is common is the use of tribe. Like, oh, yeah, I'm with
Oh,
my tribe, right? And again, one that feels very like, oh, yeah, it's hip, but could be offensive to people that actually come from a tribe. And so, again, just being mindful of those things. All
mhm.
right. Wanted to just quickly touch on job descriptions because I think that is the most common thing that people think about when we're talking about inclusive language in the context of DEI work. And it is very important, right? And so we want to be mindful of the use of language when it comes to gendered language, avoiding stereotypes, and also avoiding jargon, right? We're looking for a rock star. That, please, like we don't need any rock stars. Be mindful of that. Be mindful of internal jargon that you may be using at your organization that if you put in a job description, the average person would not recognize or be familiar with. And then the other thing here is qualifications and requirements. There's a lot of research behind the fact that if there are too many qualifications or requirements listed, that certain people, especially those belonging to historically underrepresented, historically marginalized groups, may just close out of the job post. They'll be like, oh, I'm not a good fit for this. never mind, I'm not doing this, right? And so just being mindful that you want to put the must haves in your job descriptions and try to leave out as many nice to haves as possible, because that can deter people. You can, of course, combat that by just adding a quick reminder to say, hey, and I've seen quite a few organizations start to do this. They'll add in the job description and say, hey, even if you don't meet all of the qualifications, but you think this is the right role for you and you're really interested, still apply. We'll take a look at your resume. Whether or not they look at the applications, I don't know. As someone who experienced a lot of rejections recently from the job market, can't speak on it, but I do think it's helpful to have that in there just as a gentle nudge to remind people like we are open, or at least trying to be open. Oh, I added culture fit on here too. I could go on a whole
Yeah.
tangent about that, but for the sake of time, culture fit is the number one way to keep your workforce roughly at the same demographic. It does not encourage diversity. It is actually going to push diversity away, and really kind of feed into having a homogenous workplace culture. When we say culture fit, that can trigger so many things for people. That could mean, oh, if I don't like to hang out and be extroverted after work with my colleagues or go out to lunches, then I'm not a culture fit, right? And so just being mindful of that we're always looking for people that are going to come in and add on to our team to help us achieve goals, that are going to bring new ideas, that are going to bring new experiences. Um, Sometimes we like to say they're stretching the culture in a way versus trying to fit into some mold that we've created that we think is the right way. Other thoughts, additions?
Yeah, a little bit on that. I spoke for Disrupt HR last year, and somebody asked me what the difference is, or how to uh, market for culture ad instead of culture fit. So
Yeah.
my pro tip there on the professional level is to have specific examples of what you're looking for in a culture ad instead of
Mm-hmm.
saying that you want a culture ad. Because statistically, when you say culture ad, or we don't discriminate on gender or sex or race,
Mm-hmm.
statistically you're going to have less diverse applicants. So be specific in what you're looking for in that culture ad, and that
Yep.
theoretically in the single digits increase your applicants of diverse applicants. Where they go in the application process, I haven't tracked that yet, but just be specific in what you're
Right.
looking for in the ideal teammate, um, rather than culture fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. I see a comment on LinkedIn from Monique. Thanks for engaging with us here. Who says thoughts on quote unquote operate with high horsepower. So anytime, and I'll let you give your take on this. Anytime I see something like operate on high, with high horsepower, or what's the other one that's common? Like we're looking for someone that's like always ready and like
Yeah.
available. Basically, you're signaling that there's not going to be any sort of work life balance at all.
Yep.
Although I prefer thinking about things in terms of work life integration, but I recognize not everyone wants that. But when I see something like operate with high horsepower, that's telling me that there are going to be very few boundaries on the time that you expect me to work. You think I'm going to be at your beck and call with my phone in my hand, checking my email, refreshing it, checking my Slack messages every 5 seconds. And I do not think that is ideal. I think we have to remember, and if COVID taught us nothing else, like in remote work, is that people still need to have their lives right outside of just their jobs. For some people that is, they love their work so much that that's it, and that's okay, right? But for people that want to have balance, that have other responsibilities, family, caregivers, etc., or even that just want to be able to breathe and enjoy life outside of work, I think something like operate with high horsepower is kind of a red flag for the employer.
Oh
What are your
yeah,
thoughts?
I definitely agree with that. Usually when I do or when I look at job descriptions, I'm also looking for a job. When I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for a job that's outside of the outdoor industry or a little bit outside of the DEI realm, I usually and I encourage people who release job descriptions to go through this. Google, I believe it's gender decoder. and
Mm-hmm.
it'll be like catfield.wordpress.com. It's very sketchy looking, but it's a very good website.
Yep.
And I push it through there. And one thing that what that usually signals to me is who is going to be the recruiter, who's the potential hiring manager, and what kind of person they're looking for the role. And
Yep.
usually I kind of rate it as if it's extremely masculine, I don't identify as masculine. I kind of signal that as a red flag and I put that lower in my job description to do list. So that's something that I do personally as a job hunter, and that's something that I recommend people who release the JDs to push that through. Another one, trying to remember the other one, but you have to pay for that one. But
Yes.
The Catfield one, whatever, the sketchy looking one, it's pretty impressive considering how free it is. I'm trying
Yes.
to
Oh my
remember
gosh,
what.
I'm drawing a blank on the other one. If anyone that is watching us live can help me, it's been around for a while. I used to use it
Yep.
when I was in my recruiting days, but sorry, my brain is all over the map today. But there are a number of tools out there. Grammarly also recently
Mhm.
started doing a similar thing too, and they have a free version. So again, a number of tools are out there. You don't have to like rack your brain, especially if this is not your specialty. For those of you that might use generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, etc., some of those, again, while not perfect, they do have some of those capabilities in there, and you can always just give Carmela a DM and ask for some help. And there are a number of other DEI consultants out there in my network that are also available for work, myself included. So there's help out here if you need some assistance. A few more things, and then we'll go ahead and do our actual audit. I want to touch on images, right? In addition to words and stories, really helping us understand the world and helping us understand people's experiences, we often have to think about images and imagery as well, because so much of of the visuals that are out there, they are really shaping how we not only perceive the world as a whole, but also the people around us, right? We can think about this in the context of the news. We can think about this in the context of social media, which is also now the news, which feels kind of odd to say. We can think about it in movies, TV, etc. And when I say images, I'm also talking about, your alt text descriptions as well for those that may be visually impaired. So again, these are all things that are interconnected. But what we see and what we're reading is shaping our perceptions, especially if we are looking at images and reading words that are about people that we may not be familiar with or that we may not have spent a lot of time around. And so the 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 possibility of stereotypes shaping um, inadvertently is very possible, right? And often images can signal who belongs, who's welcome, and who's not. And so we have to be very mindful of that. And I'm just sharing a few examples here on screen. There are a few few photos from some very popular and common TV shows: Sex and the City, Friends, Gossip Girl, The Office. For those of you that are watching live, if you have any comments on these images, for those of you that are able to see, but basically, these are just images of the cast. And there's not a lot of diversity from my perception. What are your thoughts on these images, Carmela?
Oh gosh, I hear about this. So I'm a big fan of Friends. That's one of my specialty topics if you invite me over for trivia. Unfortunately, I watched the after the Friends like 10 years reunion a couple years back, and several people commented Friends is based out of New York, but they don't have a diverse set of friends. And I was like, oh my god, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
And putting oh my gosh, Aisha Tyler on there. They just tossed her in it like, oh my gosh, season 6 or season 7, gosh, um, to be with Ross, and they
Mm-hmm.
had his oh my god his one girlfriend in season 2, and according to the writers, they wanted more diversity, and they're like, well, this is essentially, but
There's your token.
the token person, and the top two writers. I haven't watched Friends in a long minute. Don't ask me for trivia for a while. They wanted more diversity in there, but there were some. there's a little bit of pushback from the producer side, apparently.
Sure.
So I can only imagine that there was a similar situation for the other 3 TV shows that are presented
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, Sex in the City in New York, right? One of the
yep.
most diverse melting pots in the world. The cover is for white women.
Mm-hmm.
Gossip Girl, again, oh my gosh, I was obsessed with Gossip Girl back in the day. But again, this cover image, while they did have some diversity within the cast, you don't see any of that represented in this image. And same with The Office. Like, I think The Office is, it has so many good takes on our collective struggles with diversity within office spaces, and yet again, the cover, we don't see any of that. We don't see that diverse cast that they ultimately had. And I think that's really unfortunate. So just wanted to share again some of these images to kind of reinforce what we're talking about here. And then a few things that you can consider. I always have like, I love the rule of three. This is always like the marketing advertising side of me wanting to like put that out there. The groups of three are easy to remember. So 3 steps for choosing diverse and inclusive images, right? One, of course, first and foremost, is like you have to check your bias. And when I say check your bias, I'm talking about both individual biases, but also systemic or collective ones, right? So if we're working at, Warner Bros., I'm going to put them on blast because they are notorious for not highlighting diversity in their images. There might be this collective bias towards who should be front and center on a movie poster. And so we have to be mindful of that, and someone has to say something at some point, or should at least. Um, and then the second thing is also to be intentional, right? And you can be intentional about your image search. You can say, hey, I recognize that pretty much everyone on the cover of this looks the same. And that's probably not ideal. Does it actually reflect what's happening in the show or the movie or whatever it may be that you're doing? And you can ask yourself, who's my audience? Who's missing? Who's excluded from this photo? And don't be afraid to search for specific things or to use, resources or tools that promote diverse images. For example, I know there's a stock image site called Unsplash, for example, that, one of their goals is to promote a diverse mix of people in their images. And then the last thing is to be mindful of image composition, lighting, and cropping. I think this is one that people don't think about enough, right? So I can pull up an image where we have a bunch of people in it sitting in an office, but if the person that's this close front and center is appears to be a cisgendered white man, and then in the back, all the way back here, there's a darker skinned black lady. The composition matters,
Yep.
right? It gives us a sense of who is most important in that scenario, who's running the meeting, sitting at that table if we're looking at an image of a group of people in a meeting. So just a few tips there that I wanted to share to help people be mindful of their image selection. Anything to add before we start looking at some things?
Yeah, something that happens in the outdoor industry pretty often. These are 2 things that come up frequently is having the hero. So if you're thinking about the Last Supper, the stereotypical like Jesus in the middle, and then the disciples are on the side. Is the diversity going to be on the far side of the table? Are they going to be sitting next to Jesus? Is it actually the Jesus character when you're looking at the Last Supper? So that's something to keep in mind. And the outdoor industry historically has come up, lots of media ads have come up to fire when the diversity is on the backside. You can see Judas getting stabbed or whatever on the sides. Like, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to celebrate and uplift these voices. And if we're looking to target for more diversity and having them more inclusive when you're looking at images, have them closer to the center. And the other thing, I know this isn't part of it, but something I just want to add here when I have been on marketing research teams is positioning when you're launching these images. So let's say your target market is on Facebook, for example, but you're only releasing this on Instagram. The purpose is kind of lost there when you're trying to showcase diversity, and the people who you want to empower are not on that platform. So that's something to keep in mind, that I've seen researching diverse communities, where they are in social media and what they're Googling. And it's a little step above this, outside of this,
Yeah.
but that's something I think is important to keep in mind.
Yep. Absolutely. Um, One other thing I just thought of that I didn't touch on is, as part of sort of being intentional about your image search and the use of images, is also a good practice is to try to look for images that are going to contradict stereotypes, right? So a good example, let's say, you're looking for an image of someone typing at a computer, right? There has historically been this stereotype or this bias that older people are not technologically competent. So instead of picking someone who looks young for that photo of someone sitting at a computer, perhaps you choose someone who appears to be older. And so you are actively combating against those stereotypes, and challenging those perceptions that people typically have. Tilda added a comment on LinkedIn Live. Thanks for joining us. And she says, also keep in mind who in the image is doing something and being active and who's just passively standing there. Yes, absolutely, right? So, again, thinking about the composition, who's doing what, who appears to be, as Carmela was talking about, sort of that hero in that situation versus not, and where they're positioned in the image, is very important. So with that, Monique shared a site. I love it. Open AI's career page. And so let's go ahead and just do a quick audit. So, um, first things first, when I come to this site, I will say one of the things that stands out to me is that they're using black and white, which is excellent in terms of contrast for people that need to be able to see this. So, I do appreciate that. It's very simple. The font is a little tiny, so I'm finding myself needing to go ahead and hit my little zoom in here. Um, so that's a plus. It allows you to do that. But yeah, I like that it's pretty straightforward. I also think about neurodivergency as well, as someone who has pretty severe ADHD. When I come to a site, if there's too much going on and it's too cluttered, I probably am gonna. I'm likely to close the window. I'm not even kidding. Like I really struggle if there's a lot of stuff going on a page. So, I appreciate that this is pretty streamlined. Any first takes, Carmela,
Yeah,
on this careers page?
I'm kind of reflecting on. I'm very open in helping my team look for new opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that my coworkers with ADHD or autism anywhere on the spectrum, they generally know what they're looking for. For example, one of
Mm-hmm.
them's looking for L&D, learning and development kind of role. So that
Yeah.
ease of searchability is something that's very important to them. Yeah, wow, okay, there's a lot, but a lot easier
Yeah.
than I've seen
Yeah.
some websites just not have anything close to this.
Yeah.
Um, so simplicity there. Um, One thing that my friend Jenna Selmer from Basecamp Outdoors, she thoroughly advocates for is transparency in pay and transparency in um, hybrid, remote, in office is something very important to her job board, because do they have to relocate? Is it worth moving for? Is it
Sure.
worth like it's a looking for a job is a full-time job at this point. You might as well know everything up front. Like
Yep.
I'm not going
Yeah.
on Twitter and being like, "Hey, I don't know anything about you, so I'm just gonna swipe left," you know.
Yep.
And she wants to create an app for that. It's just a Tinder for job matching. Um,
That sounds kind of cool. I'm curious to hear more about that, but I won't derail us. But that sounds pretty cool.
it's
Um,
I'm very curious, but yeah,
yeah.
again, the font is a little on the small side for
Yeah.
me, and I'm partially, well, I'm not very blind, but the left eye is a little messed up. And
This is
I can
zoomed
feel
in,
it.
by the way. This is so. This
That's
is
zoomed
the
in. That's the
Yeah. This
regular.
is the regular size right here, and then I
Mm-hmm.
increased it a little bit. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Oh,
yeah, it's
jeez.
a little small. I agree with that. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I did try just searching, for something here, and it seems the search is actually for the entire website, and so it's not, um, like if I look for communications, it's not just for this job page. So like, this is
Mm.
something I would probably flag as something that's not too inclusive because they are hiring at OpenAI. And like, I mean,
Yeah.
you can, of course, hit a control F and it looks like, okay, yeah, if I search for communications, I can do it that way, but it's an added step, right? Um, so let's look at the first one.
Yeah, let's pick one.
Let's see, account associate. So again, a little on the small side with the font. Um, all right.
Transparency.
It goes right to the application. Okay, I guess I did click apply. So let's see, overview about the team, OpenAI's mission. I'm not going to read all of this because it's quite a bit, but they basically tell us about their mission, who they are. In pursuit of this mission, our go-to-market team is responsible for helping customers. So that's what this department, or this role is within that department. At the top, we know where it's located. The role type is full-time. Compensation up front, 160. You don't even have to scroll. I have not seen that before, so that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, pretty rare, I think.
Right? You don't see that often. Usually it's like all the way at the bottom if it's
Mhm.
there. I do know, by law, there are some requirements where you have to include compensation in job descriptions now. So
Mhm.
definitely check your local laws. And they also, in the compensation, include some of the benefits, which I think is great as well.
This looks pretty good. Well,
Yeah, it's not bad so far. Let's keep scrolling. In this role, so we've got about 8 bullets of things that they'll be doing. Um,
when I'm
let's
looking
see.
at a job description for
Uh-huh.
people who are releasing JDs, um, I usually encourage them to post what KPI, key performance indicators they're going to be responsible for or
Mm-hmm.
going to be supporting with their manager. Um, I think it's very helpful to figure out what your this looks this looks to be on the softer skill side of in this your job duties, whereas I encourage them to when I talk about specificity, having KPIs, the more technical side, so they can understand a little bit more on what their strengths and weaknesses are and what's worth having a stretch for.
Yeah.
Um, so I like that because what I'm finding is that when it's more soft skill language, it's
Mm-hmm.
more sub subjective. I always forget.
Yeah.
Whereas it's objective, like I can definitively say I can do this. I can definitively do that. So that's something that
Yes.
I recommend people who launch JDs to put into their description.
I like that. And I think that honestly hits on this very first bullet that they have, right? Act as the face of OpenAI's go-to-market team and create a delightful experience for our soon-to-be customers. What is a delightful experience? What is it? Speaking of KPIs, what the heck does that mean? That's very subjective, right? I know, I know that you want me to be the face, so that to me tells me I'm probably going to be the point of contact, the person that everyone goes to. But what is a delightful experience? What is that supposed to look like? And if it's not defined, does that mean that I'm going to have to come in and define that? Um, the next bullet is meet with potential customers, understand their problems, and determine if OpenAI's technologies are a good fit. I think that's pretty good. It's still kind of high level, but it's a little bit more specific.
Mm-hmm.
Review daily customer inquiries, prioritize contacting the highest quality inbound leads. Again, specific, that's great. Prospect into target accounts, including account planning and outbound research, et cetera, et cetera. So that's specific. Qualify and create new opportunities. Great. Ruthlessly
Yeah,
prioritize where to spend time and
yeah, that
resources.
one. Yeah, that one spoke to me too.
uh, Ruthlessly, does that mean that you expect me to be working 12 to 14, 16-hour days to do this? Um, yeah, I would be, if I were to go into this interview, one of the questions I would have immediately at the top is like, what does that mean? And kind of setting some boundaries for yourself so that people aren't expecting you to be working 24/7. Maybe that is the expectation in the culture. I don't know much about OpenAI's culture, workplace culture, to say, but yeah, that stood out to me.
Oh gosh, it says I don't have children.
Okay, yeah, you don't have any responsibilities and or life outside of that.
Yeah.
Um, which is which is not okay, right? And I think, yeah, I have other things to say, but in the interest of
Hmm.
time.
Yeah.
The last two here, help to scale and operationalize the first few stages of our sales motion. Again, pretty high level. Is there anyone else involved? When you say help, what does that mean? Is someone else running it and I'm just kind of an addition, a support? Not quite sure. And then the last is become an open AI product expert and convey our value proposition to customers of all industries and sizes. I mean, I would expect someone in a go to market account role to be pretty familiar with products, so that's not too unreasonable to me. Um, all right, so now we're looking at the requirements, qualifications. The list at first glance, it's a little long. I usually say no more than five, but let's see what they have here. So, 3 to 4 years of client facing experience in sales. Straightforward. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
One thing I'm not seeing is any sort of degree requirement, which I appreciate because there are amazing sales folks out there who perhaps just hop right into sales from high school, or during college, and maybe
Yep.
they were like so good and they dropped out, right? And I think this is a good way to be more inclusive of folks that may not have had that privilege at the end of the day, because a degree is a privilege to secure that. Um, Proven ability to run a comprehensive qualification call and effectively position next meeting with the account directors. Seems straightforward and specific. Exceptional customer communication skills. Very vague. Very vague.
Exceptional. It's a feelsies word.
And
I'm
yes,
a feelsies word.
exceptional is like, what does that mean?
Yes.
Subjective.
Yes.
Strong executive presence. who can, who can build relationships with any level of persona. I don't like executive presence. I think it's very limiting.
Hmm.
I think it's code for culture fit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I what came to my head? Yes, on the culture fit. But if you want executive presence without executive pay, I think that's something that I I look for when I look at job description language.
Yeah,
Uh, like
good
I
call out.
like the specificity. It's like if you want me to create systems, if you want me to manage full teams of volunteers and manage budgets, but you're only paying 70K, like
Mm-hmm.
that's mm, unless you're a nonprofit and it's a passion project, totally. But if you're going to for profit and 70K and you're creating systems and you have to have an executive presence, and I know 160 in the Bay is pretty. You're pretty average. You're pretty middle class at that, building an executive
Yeah,
presence. So that's something to keep in mind there.
absolutely. And this is I mean, it's not quite entry level, but I would say it's like
Hmm.
approaching mid level, right? 3 to 4 years of experience. I think for that level compensation in this location is pretty good,
Hmm.
but to your point, clarify what this means and how much you're expected to do this, because
Hmm.
that is starting to go into territory of someone who is more tenured and who should be paid and compensated accordingly. Um, an understanding of the AI
Anybody?
landscape. Sorry, were
Oh,
you going to
and
add on?
yeah. So I get this from other people as well.
Uh huh.
Just wanted to add this. If people think that we're diving a little in too deep when we're looking at job descriptions, also think about what we're talking about in your unconscious bias as well. Like we're saying the deep thoughts when your one thought is 1 nanosecond apart. We're just expanding on it. So for people who are like, you all are diving in a little too deep. Well, this is everything that's happening in the nanosecond. You're thinking that we're overdoing it.
Yeah.
Um, these little things that are important.
Yep. Absolutely. And not one, a single person isn't going to look at this and think all the things that we're highlighting, right? Like we're highlighting some things that collectively people are probably noticing as they're going through this, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Because if I were in my job search mode and I saw this and it says strong executive presence, I'd be like, what does that mean, right? And does that mean that I'm then part of an executive team in this role? Because it definitely says account associate. So, and you want 3 to 4 years. So, yeah, I appreciate you calling that out. A few more here, and then we'll take a look at a website before we wrap up. Um, an understanding of the AI landscape, our applications, and the problems they solve for our customers. Okay, sure, I'd expect that. The ability to thrive in ambiguity and work autonomously. When I tell you, tech companies love that one. like,
Yep.
like, it is not a tech role unless you have that in the job description.
Yep.
Um, I'm not a fan. Yeah, work autonomously, cool. Like, I'm for that, but the thriving in ambiguity, I think I'm not really sure what benefit this has in including this in the job description. Um,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, in the outdoor industry, there's a lot of nonprofit jobs that have similar things as well. So I definitely, I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah,
Who's calling me? But yeah, I see that a lot in the nonprofit sector and conservation organizations. Is like, yes, you have to be a little bit autonomous and entrepreneurial in spirit,
mm-hmm.
which is really good. But it's also understanding that if I were not entrepreneurial to begin with, that lack of direction can be pretty harmful, especially for someone who is of marginalized community,
Yeah,
who is not comfortable with navigating a predominantly white or predominantly male workplace as well. So that's something
yeah,
that when I work with recruiters, that's something I'm pretty skeptical of. And sometimes you just need guardrails. Like, it's a good thing to have
yeah.
guardrails and boundaries sometimes, I think.
Yeah, yeah, really great call out. Yeah, I think especially if you're 3 to 4 years into a career too, like that might be sort of, I find often people are right at that point where they start kind of taking the training wheels off uh, and perhaps kind of working more autonomously. So I would, as someone applying to this, I would definitely be curious about like what does that look like? What support am I getting from my manager, from other leaders, from my team? Because yeah, I can work autonomously, but also what does that look like here? And how much autonomy do I have to have, or is there some sort of collaborative team spirit here too?
Hmm.
The last few have fantastic communication and interpersonal skills with the ability to explain complex concepts in a simple way. I like that they give an example of what they're looking for. I think, you know, of course, we don't want the job description to be like as long as a novel, but again, some of this is just very subjective. Fantastic communication and interpersonal skills could mean a lot of things for different
Hmm.
people. Exceptional organizational skills could mean different things. Is this in terms of managing projects, managing clients, customers? It's not specified. And then the ability to operate, yes, this is the one that Monique called
Here
on,
we
the ability to
go.
operate with high horsepower, be adept at frequent context switching, and working on multiple projects at once with expansive ownership and ruthless prioritization. That is a mouthful. And they just kind of snuck that in at the end.
High
What are your
horsepower.
thoughts? Yeah, yeah. Frequent
That that's
context switching.
That's a startup
Oh,
right there. That's tech.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, at least they're telling you up front, I guess, what you're getting into.
Mhm.
It looks like at the end they do just a quick recap of what the company is about. They do the EEO, required jargon. They have a little bit about U.S. based candidates, SF's fair chance ordinance. Yeah, mostly this is like EEOC compliance type jargon at the bottom, privacy policy as well, so that you know about where your information is going when you submit to this application. Um, yeah, I mean, I personally would like to see a little bit more thoughtfulness around DEI here, even just a quick nudge. Like I said early on, like, hey, even if you don't meet all these requirements, but you think you have some experience to contribute, we'd love to have you here. You don't have to do the whole, like, we want underrepresented folks. You don't have to do all of that. You can, I guess, but I personally don't like it. I just like a gentle nudge to say, hey, we
Mhm.
see you, we're open, we're trying to expand, we want different perspectives here, so apply.
Yeah. Also, looking at what we've talked about, I think that says a little bit more on the company culture more than anything else,
Yeah.
rather than their recruitment skills. Whenever I look at stuff like this, um, that very driven. some organizations are
Yeah,
like that. It's not one that I would join, but that's just something to keep in mind as you're looking at other roles as well.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, I'm cognizant that we're like coming up on time, but we did promise a little bit of a website review. I'm gonna pick a really, really ridiculous website right now, and we're gonna do a quick little 60-second review. Target. Oh, Target.
Oh,
So
okay.
this is the Target homepage currently. What are your
Mhm.
initial thoughts, reactions to their highlights for it appears to be Father's Day gifts?
What do we got here? Usually, one thing I like when I look at Father's Day ads is, especially when we're looking at younger demographics, is I think it was really cute how they had the kid in there is showcasing them actually being a dad.
Yeah.
Whereas I remember like Lowe's and Home Depot ads back in the day, it was just like the dad holding a hammer and just dads holding
Mm-hmm.
hammers kind of ads.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's images of dads being a dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so it's really cute having him be a hero rather than being like the guy with a hammer kind of dad.
Right, right,
Uh,
right. That sort of like assumption about masculinity.
hmm
Yeah,
So
those
I really like this as the
stereotypes.
hero section. That image is the
Mm-hmm.
hero section.
Mm-hmm. It looks like there's a refresh button. Oh, it just plays. Okay.
Oh, that's
That's
cute.
that's fun. That's fun. I will say I would like to see more diversity at the top of this hero section. Like even the small little image of a grilling cookbook, kind of in terms of just looking. I'm not assuming any sort of race or ethnicity, but just looking at skin tones, it seems pretty homogenous here. And then you kind of drop down past the Father's Day bit, and it goes into summer. Again, not seeing too much diversity. There's not a lot of people images, so there's that too. They're showing more products, but I mean, I'm halfway down the page before I start seeing what appears to feel like a more diverse mix of people modeling their clothes and being featured.
hmm
I noticed that they dropped down the Pride section. I wonder if that was at the top um, at the start of the month, but who knows? As far as sizing, I think the fonts are a little tiny here. Again, I have to kind of zoom in to see
hmm
things. I will say, I think a lot of people are thinking more so about mobile web design these days because that is what's more
Ooh.
accessible for folks. And I often feel like the web versions of sites get kind of deprioritized and forgotten about a little bit more.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I have the Target app.
yeah.
And okay, it's a black kid, white dad. Um, oh, they have I know this brand, Dwayne The Rock Johnson's skincare
Oh,
brand
nice.
is
Okay.
it's pretty good for what I'm told for people with like kinky hair. That's what I'm told. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it's true.
Okay.
So the app, I'm seeing a little bit more promise on that end.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the app and the mobile versions, we see a little bit more care put into those. But
Hmm
overall, yeah, I mean, in terms of like the fonts, to me it's a little cluttered, but I could get through it. I can't speak for everyone else. I would have to click around. I have a plugin on my computer that kind of, not on my computer, but on Chrome, because I'm using a Chrome browser that allows you to see and kind of inspect alt text. So I would probably
Wow.
go through and see if they've actually taken effort to kind of do that. Um, sometimes best practices when it comes to alt text is to skip alt text for images that don't really have a function. Although some people do still add descriptors there. For example, that image of the dad and the kid, it doesn't have a function, meaning you can't click it to go somewhere, but rather there's already a button there, so you don't really have to add alt text.
hmm
But just things like that, I would encourage people to look out for. Also, think about the language. Overall, the language seemed pretty straightforward and limited as their target and just focusing on product, so it makes sense.
hmm
Um, I know we're at time. Hopefully, this was a helpful sort of crash course on inclusive language and inclusive images. Maybe next time we'll dive a little bit more into exploring some additional sites and job postings. But for those of you that tuned in, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to see more of this or if there are other topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know. Carmela, before we wrap up, anything you want to tell the people, anything you want to plug? I know you're job searching, I know you're consulting. Tell us all the things.
Yeah, so the one thing, sign up for my email list. Pretty much any questions that I've received ever working as a DEI consultant, we're going to be answering that in the blog and in the email
Nice.
list. So it's an easy way for me and Adriele to not spend as much one-on-one time, and that way this information is a little bit more accessible to everybody. So sign up for my email list. The link is in my LinkedIn bio. And I think it's my turn to host in, I think, 2 weeks as well. So
Yeah.
follow me and connect with me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, y'all hopefully know me. You're tuned into the event that I scheduled, but if not, please connect with me. Follow me on LinkedIn, Adriele Parker. I'm Adriele Parker across all platforms. If you are looking for DEI consulting, whether that's ad hoc, long term, or even coaching, feel free to drop me a note, and I'll see you all back here next week, same time, Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern. Not sure what the topic is, but if you have suggestions, let me know. All right, see y'all then. Thanks again for tuning in.